Okay, girls, this video is strictly on Chapter 2, Section 2 for the reading for today. So as you saw in the previous video, this will ask you to pause at different areas of the reading. So I'll have you read it in sections, and when you're finished with the section, you will go to the next slide, and you'll kind of listen to the discussion, and then it'll tell you which pages to read next. So this is a discussion on pages 35 to 36 in your textbook, and it stops right before Spain responds to competition. So in this section, you learn about the Northwest Passage. Now, the Northwest Passage simply refers to a term that was coined by early monarchs of France, Spain, and England that wanted to find a way to cut across North America. So right now, we talked about early explorers in the last section having to go around South America, having to go around Africa, and the monarchs were like, if we can find a way to cut clear across North America, and we can hop straight over to Asia from there without going around, that would be the best situation. So it's simply a water passage to get across North America, to get to Asia faster. The goal here was to have a quick route to make money. Now, Northwest Passage attempts. There are several people that tried to find the Northwest Passage. The first one is named Henry Hudson, and the map of his voyages is here on the top. He had two different voyages. The first one, he tried to go up the Hudson River to present-day New York. So New York is around here. And he basically mapped out a whole bunch of the islands that are around here. Now, in 1610, he had a second voyage where he tried to go through the Labrador Sea and up the Hudson Strait. And here, at some point, his crew mutinied, put him afloat in a separate boat, so like the lifeboat or something that was on his main boat, and didn't really give him a way to sail, and he was never seen again. So, long story short, Mr. Hudson, we don't know how his life ended, but he did start the process of attempting to find a Northwest Passage, but he didn't actually find it himself. Second person is John Cabot. He landed in Newfoundland, Canada, which is up here, and he thought he had reached Asia and claimed the land for England. Now, we know now he did not reach Asia, but claiming this land for England, the English were able to set up fur trading posts, able to set up small colonies up there, and that's why England still has an influence on the area today. He sailed again the next year and hoped to find Japan, but he also was lost at sea and never seen again. But he was not lost at sea because his crew mutinied. He just never came back. Okay, Verrazano is a French gentleman who also helped to find the Northwest Passage. He helped make very detailed maps of the eastern coast of North America. Now, he failed to find a passage, but he made some of the most detailed maps that it made other people feel inspired that they knew the area, and people started feeling like they could colonize because everything was so detailed. And he also made accounts of the Native Americans that he encountered along the way. So just the level of detail that he sent back to his home country was something that they had never seen before. Now, the final man to try to find the Northwest Passage was named Jacques Cartier. He was French, and he traveled down the St. Lawrence River, which is right here, and he ended up in what is today Montreal. Now, he tried several times, or 2 times, to go up the river to try to see if the river would eventually go all the way through, because I believe they knew that there were lakes here, and they hoped that they all just had tributaries that would get him to the other side. He found rather quickly on his second voyage, however, that there were rapids on this river, and there was no way that you could safely get a boat through. So after Cartier had his failed attempt at finding the Northwest Passage, people kind of stopped and figured out that there needs to be a different way to get across North America, or they should just be happy using the resources of North America altogether. So now you're going to pause, and you're going to read pages 36 and 37, and then you're going to hit play again, and we'll continue with our discussion. So now you've read about how Spain responds to competition. So the Spanish were very excited when they made the Treaty of Tordesillas with Portugal. However, when France and England started making their impact on North America, Spain started to get angry because they had done so much to claim as much land in North America that they could, that they thought, well, France and England will just leave us alone. But now France and England start poking around, and they start having conflicts with one another. Now, another reason that Spain was annoyed with these countries was that it was also rooted in a religious conflict. Spain was predominantly Catholic, and a few years earlier, there was what was called the Protestant Reformation. Now, the Protestant Reformation, in a nutshell, started a divide in the Catholic Church. People started to think that maybe the way that the Catholics worship was not the only way to worship. So you started seeing other faiths spring up. The first one was in England when they established the Anglican Church. Okay, later on you start seeing Lutherans and Quakers and other forms of Protestant religions coming about, and that started to irritate Spain because they felt that being Catholic was the way to go, and that's fine. That was the religion that their government chose. So, but the other part is England had kind of denounced Catholicism along the way, so they really had a beef with England because they felt nobody should denounce their religion. And I think we can all wrap our heads around that. So, they're annoyed with England because it's a turf war now, and it's a religious war. Now, Spain in general, since they had taken over Central America and parts of South America, they were looking to North America, and one of the people that really helped to explore this was Cabeza de Vaca, and this map up at the top shows you kind of the route that he took. Now, they originally wanted to come over, and he was a conquistador, land in Florida, and see what kind of riches they could get from Florida, because people have heard of cities of gold. They wanted to find more areas with a bunch of gold like they did with the Aztecs, so they were really excited to find Native American tribes and to basically exploit them. Now the problem was, when they landed in Florida, they ended up not getting along too well with the natives, and only part of the crew escaped. Cabeza de Vaca was with them. So they got back on one of their boats that they were able to put back together, and they decided to start sailing around the Gulf Coast. The goal was keep sailing around, and they could eventually make it back to Mexico City, get on a different boat, and go back home to Spain. However, the gods had another plan. When they reached Galveston, there was a major storm that occurred, and their boat sank. So Cabeza de Vaca and only a few like 10, 20 people, maybe, were left, and they had to learn how to deal with the Native Americans. So the Karankawa made contact with Cabeza de Vaca, took him in, and through the course of his wanderings throughout Texas, so he wandered around for about 7 years until he made it to Mexico City. He took very good records and was able to tell us a lot about the Native Americans, how they worked, how they traded, how they ate. He eventually made his way up to learning how to basically be a shaman. So he went around from tribe to tribe, giving them medical help. He had no training as a doctor, but he had learned from the land, and that's how he kind of kept himself from being killed, and he learned how to adapt. So that's Cabeza de Vaca in a nutshell. Now, the rest of our relationships with Spain get worse. So Queen Elizabeth, who is a Protestant, is now in charge of England, and she decides that she is going to challenge Spain's power at sea. Spain had this huge fleet of ships called the Armada, and for years they had dominated the oceans. Nobody had as big of a navy, nobody had as powerful of a navy, but Queen Elizabeth was out to change that. So she sent out sailors that earned the name Sea Dogs because they would attack the bulky Spanish ships. Now earlier we talked about how a caravel was lighter and faster. The Armada was kind of the old school kind of ship that was a little bit slow, but it had a lot of gunpowder. The English ships were speedy. They could outrun most of the Spanish ships when the Spanish ships could outgun them. So that was the goal. Take out as many Spanish ships as you possibly can. One of the most famous sea dogs is Sir Francis Drake. He went on a 3-year voyage around the world where he simply raided and pillaged Spanish forts that were on the coast and taking out Spanish ships wherever he could. Now in 1588, things finally come to that pivotal moment. Spain sends the Armada to England to conquer England and to restore Catholicism in that country, because Catholicism was no longer the religion of England. Queen Elizabeth's navy ends up defeating the Armada in the English Channel, and this is a picture of representing part of that battle, and the Spanish Armada just is no more. It completely crippled Spain's ability at sea, and now England was the navy power to beat. So now you need to read pages 38 and 39 read up on the Dutch and the French, and we will finish off this section. So if you don't know, the Netherlands also refers to the Dutch. They are the same thing. There is no country called Dutch. The country is called the Netherlands. The people that live there are called the Dutch. So now that that's covered, hopefully there is no more confusion. Samuel Champlain is the first explorer we're going to discuss in this section. He does a great job exploring along the St. Lawrence River, which is kind of where, so if you remember Montreal, this is where Cartier established himself, and Cartier kind of ended up along here where some of the rapids are. So Champlain figured out a way to traverse some of the rapids and went overland to basically set up the first French settlement, which ended up being Quebec, and to open up fur trade in the area. Basically, New France and fur trade were one and the same. That's what the French were very interested in. Beaver pelts or beaver fur was the trade that they made the most money on, and they could trade the pelts back home. Now, New France is what the colony was called at first. It eventually became known as Quebec. But New France was known for basically being mostly fur traders, so you didn't have a lot of women up here unless you brought your wife with you, but for the most part that was people's trade, in the fur trade. And it was Catholic priests that were there to convert the natives. Now, France is different than Spain or Portugal. When we talked about the 3 ways that the Spanish or the Portuguese would take over Native Americans, this does not apply to the French. The French were very friendly. They wanted to make good relationships with the Native Americans, not only because the Native Americans knew how to trap very well, they also traded for things that they needed. So they had a very healthy relationship, and when it came to times of war, which are coming later, they would align themselves with the Native Americans and have the extra manpower that they needed. Now, the second settlement of interest is New Netherland. So this is the Dutch colony. It is in present-day New York, and literally in part of New York City. This was on the Hudson River, and this was a very welcoming colony. If you were persecuted in your homeland, so remember we talked about the Reformation and how being Catholic in some countries was not always a good thing, and being Protestant in some countries was sometimes even worse. If you wanted to escape being persecuted or hunted for your faith, so to speak, you could come to New Netherland, and they would accept you, no matter what. And it became a very multicultural place because of it. Now, eventually, they purchased the island of Manhattan, which is the island that New York City is on today, from the Native Americans in the area, and established the city of New Amsterdam. Now, Amsterdam is in the Netherlands, so New Amsterdam is kind of like Amsterdam #2. They were very successful, and hopefully after today you can get a sense for how France and England are slightly different than Spain and Portugal in terms of setting up their colonies and exploring the New World. So what is next? For the rest of today, you can start on your homework if you're finished early. At 9:10, the class together will watch a video from Safari Montage, and there is a notes template posted to the European Exploration folder, and there's a folder inside of it that has the name of today, so click the right folder, you'll find the file, have it ready to go. Otherwise, you can start on your homework and use your Wi-Fi.